Hurricane Milton is going to be a deadly and catastrophic storm. It will bring massive storm surge, high winds, and severe flooding as it moves across the state of Florida.
Welcome back to this edition of Jacob and Terry's Weather Talk. You heard right there from the FEMA director, a catastrophic storm, Hurricane Milton, bearing down on the state of Florida. Terry, we had hoped that things maybe change. It's weakened a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess unfortunately the forecast is really right on schedule.
Right.
And the good news about that is that we saw it actually peaked, 2 days ago and peaked again last night, and it is now weakening slowly, but that was exactly what the National Hurricane Center forecast. And it's not going to weaken quite quickly enough, unfortunately, for those folks along the Gulf Coast of Florida.
So we got an advisory in at 11 a.m. with the latest kind of data, the latest thinking from the forecast. If we could pull up the weather
really
graphics.
important. Yeah, it was a really important update, and really every update from here on out is a very important update from the National Hurricane Center. There are hurricane hunters flying through the storm all day today, and again, the latest, if we can pull up that graphic, we can kind of give the latest. They did note that there is some weakening. There is some wind shear now, which we talked about over the last couple of days, watching what could happen to weaken the storm. Yeah. Wind shear, one of those things.
You'll notice, too, when we show you the satellite image, it's not looking like if you think of a buzzsaw, something that maybe you saw in shop class when you're in high school, that buzzsaw look, it doesn't have that distinct look the same way, and a lot of that is due to some of the shear that's kind of cutting it off. The eye is also now closed. It's cloud-filled.
It's actually open.
Open, rather, yeah. Yes, and it's open to the south.
Right, so not a complete concentric eye, and that's again a sign of some weakening, and that's a bit of good news. And the National Hurricane Center is expecting that shear and the slow weakening is going to continue really for the next 12 hours until it makes landfall. So something that will continue to sort of eat away at the storm. We're not expecting a last-minute sort of re-energizing of the storm, which is good news.
Yep. And then finally, it is still expected to be a strong Cat 3 or weak Cat 4 hurricane at landfall. And we say miles matter all the time. The track may be about 20 to 30 miles off. It depends on those final sort of jogs, if it's going to jog north or south. At the moment, the track has this going right into Sarasota County. Yeah,
and that was an important point made by the National Hurricane Center in their latest discussion, that the forecast has been pretty, really good all along. I mean, pretty much had it going somewhere near Tampa for the last couple of days, but 20 to 30 miles difference is a major difference depending on, and we'll talk later about what side of the storm you want to be on or would prefer to be on. But current look at the storm, you can see that that center is sort of getting harder to pinpoint.
Yeah, that's the cloud-filled notation from the National Hurricane Center, and also it's getting a little bit more easterly heavy, if you will. It's definitely still a very powerful storm on that visible satellite. You don't see the donut hole of the eye as we have seen in the last couple of days. Still a very dangerous storm, though. Now, the National Hurricane Center and NOAA and the Air Force, they fly these reconnaissance missions. Some of them leave out of Lakeland, Florida. Others leave out of Biloxi, Mississippi. This one that we're looking at left out of Biloxi, Mississippi, and within the last couple of hours have noted a central pressure of 929 millibars. So put it about where it is right now. We'll look at the latest stats in just a second, but this is really where we get sort of what we call the jumps in the strengthening or slowing down a little bit. A lot of that data is gathered from the hurricane hunters.
Yeah, and I mean, just amazing that this is literal live raw data that we're getting, and you can watch it online if you Google it up. You can actually see the data as it comes in, basically. Now, the pressures they were getting when it was at its peak were in the high 800 millibar range. So obviously we're well off of the peak of the storm, but still 929 is a very deep and powerful storm. And here's, like you were saying, the latest advisory. Actually, as of 12 p.m., they update. Yeah. They're now going hourly, it appears.
Which is great.
Yep.
So this is moving to the northeast at 17 miles per hour, so starting to get a little bit of forward motion to it as well. So if we're looking for silver linings, one of them would be that it is a bit of a faster moving storm. It's not going to park itself over and just batter the same area over and over again. But that forward motion also does play a bit of a role in the storm surge, as it is quicker to push that that surge inland.
Yeah, you basically can add whatever the wind speed is. You can basically add the forward motion to that, and you see you're basically if the wind speeds are 145 and you're moving at 17 miles an hour, you can basically add those two together, and that just worsens the storm surge.
Yep.
The other thing to note is that this thing has taken the track that it's taken. It was a very, very strong Cat 5. And then went back to a Cat 5. So that surge has been accumulating all throughout the Gulf of Mexico. And so even though it's weakening now, I still think the surge is going to be really something to
catastrophic, as the FEMA director talked about. This is an interesting graphic because it shows a couple of things. The first of which, the rapid intensification that it underwent on Monday, really from a tropical storm late Sunday night, and then Monday going from a Category 1 to a Category 5 storm in the second fastest time frame we've ever measured.
Yeah, just a remarkable deepening that took place there. And then again, we saw a little bit of weakening when it did that eye wall replacement we talked about yesterday. It kind of gathered itself together and again increased in intensity last night. And again, as forecast, it's now slowly weakening as it starts to feel the land mass just off, just a little bit to the east. Still hurricane warnings for a wide swath from Cedar Key all the way down to Naples in Florida, and even on the East Coast, Daytona Beach, Melbourne, Fort Pierce. So, the storm will quickly pass through Florida. It'll only take probably half a day, a little bit more to traverse the whole landfall there, but still probably Category 1 as it's coming off the East Coast of Florida.
Absolutely, and the Atlantic side of Florida may actually see some storm surge on the north side of the storm from Melbourne to Daytona Beach and northward. This is an interesting map. What this really denotes is the wobbles in the track. The wobbles are important. You see that wobble right there, that little northerly jog, then southerly jog. We'll be watching very closely as this nears landfall tonight, early Thursday morning, to see if there are any wobbles that in fact could worsen a place or maybe improve conditions for a place. We sometimes see them. Wobbles matter in the real-time forecasting of these type of storms. And you can see how it's not just a straight path.
It's not a straight path.
A to B is not.
Yeah, I mean, you look at I think everybody's used to seeing the National Hurricane Center cones, right? And it looks like, okay, here's the storm and here's the cone. And, in a sense, it's a good forecast, but every little, it's got a mind of its own. These storms they're not like mid-latitude storms where there's like, a straight west to east push. They say as the eye replaces and they're going through so many different processes, like little wobbles along the way. And the last couple wobbles literally will make the difference between, what towns are just run over and devastated and who may escape the worst.
Yeah. Just incredible to look at there. And this is the latest track too. Once again, we kind of mentioned it off the top. Sarasota County, Sarasota, Florida, kind of right in the path of this storm. Tampa, starting on the north side of Tampa as you go closer to Cedar Key, and also on the southern side of this, Fort Myers, perhaps just outside of the cone too. But that doesn't mean they're obviously going to miss any sort of impacts.
Still a great deal of storm surge down near Fort Myers. And interesting, I was talking to Beth Germano this morning. She just came back she went to vacation not too far from Fort Myers, came back a few days ago, and she said it's remarkable how they are still recovering from Ian 2 years ago. And not to mention, Helene dropped quite a bit of damage down there too.
Yeah, and in fact, that's one thing that the governor has been really kind of recommending. People try to get as much debris as possible. You see on your screen right there, the National Guard was brought up and they're trying to do their best. All of that debris turns into missiles with 100 mile per hour winds. And so that's why they're making a big push right now to try to get as much off of the ground as possible.
I can't imagine those folks down there having a home close to the water. You were devastated 2 years ago, you're rebuilding, you're just kind of getting back on your feet. And here we go again. And we'll show a graphic a little bit later that right now, as of right now, the track for Milton and the track for Ian, there's only about a 50-mile difference there. So really just a tough go for folks down there on the West Coast.
So as we look at these graphics here, this is our Futurecast model. These are starting to get more into the sweet spot of our Futurecast modeling possibilities. What you'll notice here is this model is suggesting a more top-heavy storm in that the heaviest of the rain is actually falling on the north side, which happens, which is typical. But on that south side, rain really not an impact at all.
I mean, this is again just one model run. I wouldn't say that folks in Sarasota and Venice aren't going to get a bunch of rain. They are,
sure.
But it certainly looks like that. We talked about that shear coming from the southwest. That made the bottom half of this storm may end up getting sort of sheared off a little bit, and therefore a lot of the rain may end up, which is not all that atypical on the north side of the storm.
Right.
And this is kind of what that's showing. And I think rainfall totals are still estimated to be between 6 and 12 inches from Orlando over to Daytona Beach.
Yeah.
You know, the main impact there, obviously, other than some wind, will be just a whole lot of rain in about a 12-hour span.
So this is a graphic that shows why the track matters so much. So the red line there that you see, that is the current National Hurricane Center track. North of that track is where we will see more rain but lower surge, and that has to do with the wind direction. It's more of an offshore wind coming from the land, pushing the water out. So Tampa Bay, in this instance, actually spared of the worst of the storm surge. Meanwhile, as you go towards Sarasota, Venice, Englewood, towards Port Charlotte, they're getting all of that storm surge, all of that wind directly pushing that wall of water inland. As you talked about the comparison with Ian, that's what we saw, the worst of it. I was in the Weather Center with you watching Ian. We were watching some live webcams, seeing homes being flooded in real time, and it's very possible that those same areas are going to get hit once again.
And you can imagine, again, 20 to 30 miles difference of that center line, that red line. If it goes 20 to 30 miles north towards Bradenton or south towards Venice or Englewood, like major consequences, you know, in just little wobbles. And again, we've mentioned this all along. These are all the hurricane landfalls in the state of Florida and in the Gulf in the last 75 years, and there has not been one. Of course, Ian was the closest that we've had to this line.
Yep.
But still, this is a fairly rare event for like the Tampa, Sarasota area for sure.
Yeah. But the Gulf of Mexico, no stranger to major hurricanes. Since 2017, we had a historic drought of major hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Atlantic Ocean. We would get them, they would stay offshore. But then, starting in 2017 with Harvey, that really, Harvey and Irma really, that broke the streak of not having a major hurricane, and then we've seen almost one ever since then, each year.
It's been quite, yeah, and it's funny how these things go in bunches. It's hard to really explain, but you know, even in New England, we had you know, in the 40s and 50s, we had all these landfalls. Carol, Edna, there was a 44, all these hurricanes, 38. And then you have years or decades where you just don't see anything. And then all of a sudden, you get another burst of activity. Kind of hard to explain, but certainly the Gulf has absolutely been battered in the last 5 to 10 years.
And Florida, when you look at this, they've taken the brunt of them with Irma, Ian, Idalia. I named storms, by the way. The letter that has been most retired in...
is that right? I didn't.
I'm almost positive that that is the case.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And then you have 4 right there that have been retired.
Yeah. Ida, Ian, all those,
So this is the track versus Ian. We talked about that 2 years ago. 50 miles difference. So areas that are recovering going to be hit yet again.
Yeah, I know some folks that down in Bonita Springs. I think the thing about living in Massachusetts is I think almost everybody either A, has some kind of home there, knows somebody that has a home there, knows a friend. Like it seems like almost everybody knows somebody. And this is one of those areas that are just, there's all kinds of New Englanders down there with interest down there. And this is just really bad news. A 50-mile difference in over two major landfalling hurricanes, landfalling within 50 miles of each other over the course of 2 years. It's going to be really hard for those areas to once again recover.
Yeah. You mentioned, you know, a lot of interest. Like even the Sox, they play in Fort Myers and their spring training. Like a lot of people, this is an important spot. The latest storm surge forecast, if you have interest in Tampa or St. Petersburg, you've seen improvements. So we want to caution you, obviously 8 to 12 feet, still as dangerous as 10 to 15 feet, but not to the same maybe extent. But from Sarasota down to Port Charlotte, the National Hurricane Center still has 10 to 15 feet for the storm surge, and then less as you get a little bit further away from the center of the storm.
Interesting that we're still talking 3 to 5 feet of storm surge on the east side of Florida, Daytona, Jacksonville. Again, that's as the storm pulls out, and then you get the wraparound.
On the north side of the track.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And so what is storm surge? We get this every once in a while. We have to deal with it around here when it comes to nor'easters in some cases. But basically you have your normal sea level. So whatever that is on a day-to-day basis. But then when you add the wind on top of that, it's basically pushing that water inland. And so when we talk about what a 12-foot storm surge looks like, look outside, look at your first level of your home, and that's what that water level would be.
Yeah, so a basketball hoop is 10 feet.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that is life-changing. That's life-threatening. So Terry's a little taller than me. I'll go on a record and say I'm 5'7". You add 2.5 of me,
right,
and you're talking about that 9 to 12 foot storm surge that Tampa would be dealing with. 3 of me for Port Charlotte, for instance.
Really hard to imagine, and it's not something you would ever want to live through. And hopefully anyone that's in the path from Tampa Bay, Sarasota, all the way down, hopefully those folks have left their homes and have evacuated safely. Because a storm surge is by far the #1 issue, killer for these types of storms. Until you really experience it, and I hope you never have to, you really can't get a grasp of just how dynamic it is.
Not to compare, we do not really compare storms because each storm has its own beast that you have to deal with. But I'll never forget, after Hurricane Katrina, I went and did some hurricane relief effort in Biloxi, Mississippi. For 1 mile inland, homes were wiped off the map.
Right.
And people just didn't realize the power of water. They lived through Camille back in the 1960s. They said, my home had a foot of water in Camille. Meanwhile, there was no home in Katrina, right? So the memory of previous storms sometimes poisons you to the next storm.
I think there's a few things involved there. Since those 50s, 60s, there's been so much buildup along the coast.
Sure.
And B, climate change plays a factor. The sea levels are higher now.
Sea levels are higher.
So you've got to take into account that the same storm, say 50, 60 years ago, we're adding several inches more just off the top, I think, because of the sea level. So, that's always going to be a factor. And now Tampa may not get, they may not get
to 12 feet.
Right.
But you look at some of their highest tides in Old Port Tampa. Tampa, by the way, very old city. So they've seen a lot. Look at some of these high tides in recent memory. These are the highest high tides. Ada, Idalia, and Helene, all within the last 4 years. Now, as of last night, Milton was scheduled or forecast to have over 12-foot high tides. That's probably come down a little bit with the latest track forecast. But regardless, when you're talking 6 feet, 6.5 feet or 7 feet or so with Helene, and then let's say 2 or 3 feet above that for Milton,
right,
that's
in the course of 2 weeks.
In the course of 2 weeks. That is incredible to think of in my mind.
And no doubt about it, we're seeing the highest high tide levels set almost up and down the East Coast. Not even for major, here in Boston, we get these incredible, high tide levels in just regular old storms now.
Yep.
Again, a factor of climate change.
Yep.
The wind field of Milton, this is 11 o'clock tonight, right about the time of landfall. Again, unfortunate it's happening overnight, but that's the forecast. And we think that right around, probably between, say, 8 p.m. and 3 or 4 a.m. will be the brunt of the wind and the storm surge for places like Tampa, Sarasota, down towards Cape Coral. But the wind field will also be expanding. So the tropical storm force winds, the yellow on this map, probably almost covering the entire state of Florida.
Yeah. Just like you look at Miami, they may stay out of the breeziest conditions, but that is a big storm.
Yep.
That is a very big storm.
And even inland areas, Orlando, the eye will pass or the center of the storm anyways, will pass very close, maybe a little bit south of Orlando, and certainly hurricane force gusts all the way across, from west to east across the Florida panhandle there.
And then finally exits back into the Atlantic. And we should say that here in Boston, in New England, little to no impacts from this, maybe a little bit of choppiness as this system goes into the ocean, but otherwise really not a big deal for us. check out some of these wind gusts. As we get closer to the overnight hours, towards that midnight hour, as Terry mentioned, this is 8 o'clock. You already see almost 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts at Bradenton Airport, up to 100, 120-mile-per-hour wind gusts. And there's the eye actually coming onshore in Tampa there. This will go towards Bartow and towards Kissimmee, and eventually kind of move on out of here. But still, those hurricane force winds will be felt all the way through central Florida, all the way to the Atlantic side.
Yeah, even on the backside of the storm, as the eye passes through, there's a whole other side to that sort of eye wall structure. And again, it's 6 a.m. on Thursday. We're still talking, tropical storm force gusts, fit from 35 to 70 mile-an-hour winds. And they only slowly abate during the day on Thursday. And we showed this graphic over the last couple of days, but probability of hurricane force winds now, I mean, we're nearing almost basically a certainty,
right,
from the south side of Tampa Bay through Sarasota.
It's really the fringes that may be a little bit more uncertain, but wherever the eye goes, you will get hurricane force winds.
Yep.
And this is our Saffir-Simpson scale. We use this to measure the strength of hurricanes. This is not unlike the enhanced Fujita scale for measuring tornadoes, but how we measure this is through the use of wind and wind alone. When we talk about smaller hurricanes, categories 1 and 2, those are with winds between 74 and 110 miles per hour. But as soon as you get to about 111 miles per hour and higher, that's our major hurricanes. That's where we see the catastrophic storm surges, the intense wind damage, and usually our biggest rainmakers too.
Yep, and you see the category 3 goes up to 130 miles an hour, and right now I believe the latest NHC forecast was right around 130 at landfall. So you can see that's the sort of right between the category 3, category 4 level. Those storm surge numbers are very similar to what we just showed you, anywhere from 8 to 12 or 10 to 15. And you're talking about, again, all homes near the coast flooded with several feet of water, significant damage, roofs, exterior walls, power outages, and this could last weeks, if not months, in some of these areas. Thankfully, we're avoiding the category 5 sort of ramifications here, but still, category 3 and 4, a major deal. And we've been talking about the right side, which side of the storm to be on, how critical that track is, and this graphic will kind of show you. Again, taking the forward movement, the front right side of the hurricane is where you really don't want to be, and that's right now Sarasota down to Fort Myers.
Right. And so that's where they would get the biggest wind impacts and surge impacts. Meanwhile, on the other side, as you go towards Tampa and north of Tampa, that's what we would call the front left. That's where they would get the significant wind, but not the strongest wind, and also the heaviest rain for sure.
And that's what the Futurecast frankly showed, Del, that big chunk of rain basically on the left side of the track, on the front left side of the track. And the back sides of the storm, again, it's very significant, nothing to sneeze at, but again, that front right side is really the most deadly part of the storm.
Absolutely.
And we got one more graphic just to illustrate that with the different factors involved here. That fright run, you can see basically all of the major concerns are pinned in red, whereas in the left front, it's really about the inland flooding, the rainfall flooding.
You know what's interesting? I see on that right front that tornado risk. I'm not sure if it was Helene or a storm before that, but we had some major tornado outbreaks associated with some of these. And even here in New England, some of our biggest tornado days have been from tropical storms or remnants of tropical storms.
It's unfortunately like a sort of a secondary concern with these storms because there's so much rotation going on in the atmosphere. It doesn't take much to spin up a hurricane in any one of these. And I'm sure we'll see tornado watches. If they're not already, tornado watches will be issued up and down the Florida coast, maybe up through the Carolinas as well. So this is a graphic I just created this morning. Let's just say Milton as it's currently structured, if we were to sort of take it and move it over New England with the center over Boston. This is just to give an idea of how far out the hurricane force winds go and the tropical storm force winds. So as of 11 a.m., the hurricane force winds extended out 35 miles from the center of the storm. So if the center were in Boston, again, this is a sort of theoretical thing, this is how far out you would experience hurricane force winds.
And that's wind over 74 miles an hour.
Yep. So you're talking all the way down as far south as Plymouth, far west as Worcester, up through Nashua, Hudson, New Hampshire. So again, it's relatively small area where the strongest winds, these hurricane force winds are, but you know, that's again why 20, 30 miles difference in the track makes it, you know, is a big deal.
And then the tropical storm force winds extend even further. You're talking hundreds of miles out towards Albany, up towards Burlington, Vermont. Even New York City would be in those tropical storm force winds.
Hence why I think basically almost the entire state of Florida is in either a hurricane warning or tropical storm warning. You know, even down towards southern Florida, Miami, Naples, and up towards Jacksonville in northern Florida. Certainly tropical storm force winds are likely to happen. So
now I know that we do have a little video from, I think yesterday, of the eye of Milton. If we could pull that up and just show people what Milton kind of looked like. Mesmerizing.
If you look right down in the center of that thing, you can see all those little meso vortices spinning around. Just unbelievable. I mean, it's hard to really get a full picture of how, you know, in a 3D sense, but like you're like looking down into a hole essentially.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I do school talks. I just came from one in Stoneham today, and we were in sort of a circular room, and I had our kids put on our thinking caps, and I said, imagine we're in the middle of Milton. And I just went silent. I go, that's exactly what you would hear. No sound, maybe birds chirping, no wind, no rain, but all around you, the most intense wind on Earth.
It's one of the most surreal experiences, and I experienced it back in 1985. I'm dating myself a little bit now. Hurricane Gloria went over my house, and I think this dates back to one of the first times I was fascinated by weather.
Yeah.
The winds are howling. I think we had gusts to near 100 miles per hour, and then all of a sudden, it's just blue skies.
Yeah.
And you know, I was with my uncle, we go outside and we're like, look at, I mean, it's like all of a sudden the storm's gone, you know what I mean? And then 10, 20 minutes later, you're on the other side of the eye wall and you're running back in the house.
Right.
Really is one of those things that, again, this is not saying that anybody—
We don't recommend
anybody should run out in the middle of Milton or any of these storms, but it's just, it really is a remarkable experience. And when you have a defined eye like that, you know, which again, there probably won't be with Milton, that it's probably not going to recreate itself like it was yesterday.
Right.
Thankfully.
Just, you see that eye on the strongest storms. And fortunately, the eye has opened up a little bit and it is as concentric as before. All right, so if we could just pull up the graphics, we'll recap where things stand right now. As of right now, Milton is a Category 4 storm, with the latest track taking this right over Sarasota. To the north is Tampa, to the south is Fort Myers. This is an area that has not taken a direct impact from a landfalling hurricane in at least 74 years. But unfortunately, that streak is about to be broken. This should be a Category 3, a strong Category 3 or Category 4 storm, as it makes landfall tonight into early Thursday morning. We'll be watching this very closely over the next few hours, and certainly we'll have live coverage on WBZ starting at 5 and throughout the evening, even tomorrow, as the full picture becomes a little bit clearer.
Yeah, we'll be tracking every little wobble, because every little wobble counts and could save or cost lives. So literally, again, hopefully all those folks evacuated that need to down there, and we just wish everyone the best.
Absolutely. For now, we appreciate you tuning in. As always, if you have any questions of Terry or myself, find us and we'll try to get those questions answered. But we appreciate everyone tuning in. Stay safe.